Whereas now we have again, a completely connected, service orientated kind of network, as it seems. So what I wanted to do is really start thinking about, well, what has been the cause of that change? And also, what does it look like for the future? I mean, this is our today. For most organizations, this is what they see today, but how is that going to even change in the near future? So if we start thinking about this secure path forward, I started looking at a series of articles, and there was a great article yesterday on India Times, focusing on business of brands and the kind of the changes that COVID-19 will typically bring. And what we can actually see, I've highlighted some of the key elements to be taken away from this paper. Now, of course, there was lots of negativity. There was lots of concerns around the economic fallout. When we looked at the positive aspect of this, if you can have a positive impact or effect after a pandemic, there were some really important kind of key takeaways. And the first was this journey to agility. And I thought this actually resonated really well with the secure path forward. So the journey forward to agility. And what we're seeing is that more and more organizations have already stated that, again, post COVID-19, they are going to be more digital, more data driven, and they are going to be more in the cloud than ever before. Now, some of this comes down to obviously the cost structure of moving to cloud. Cloud typically is a great way to help set and baseline a kind of cost and spend, because it's all service model orientated. So you're buying services, you're using kind of operational costs associated to that. It also allows organizations to be more agile. So instead of making huge investments in infrastructure and appliances from a security perspective, they can be very selective in terms of which services they're consuming in year one. And they can obviously ramp that up or scale that back down depending on kind of how successful their business is. It's actually very, very easy to do when you're looking at it from a cloud perspective. And there's also that big goal to move towards more automation. And again, with most cloud services, automation is built in by default. It's actually one of the strengths that cloud brings. So that's also where the focus is on the journey to agility. And I think, again, this is a core statement at the end there. This agility will be the course of the future. Now, if we think about this in terms of careers and demands, right now we're seeing this kind of this growth over the last 5 years in asking for more people to have cloud computing skills. And again, I said at the beginning, I've been involved in information security for 20 years. I've spent the last 10 years focused and trying to become a specialist in cloud security and cloud computing. But of course, there's other aspects to that as well. We have, again, a big growth in AI, ML, blockchain and cybersecurity skills. It's great that this article calls out all of those requirements. And one thing that was really important to take away is that, again, this economic article also focuses that this is going to be a growing segment. So jobs in these domains will be plentiful and will pay well, and we expect serious demand because currently there is a supply gap. So there's not enough people with, again, these types of skills. Now, of course, this is really important as we start thinking about this secure path forward. So we have a driver from the businesses out there to say we want agility. We want to be, again, more digital, data driven and in the cloud. But in many cases, we don't have the right skill set. We don't have the right technology skill sets in some of these areas. But there's ways, obviously, of focusing on this. And one key aspect for me is to try to simplify everything. I always start off with a very simple kind of 5-step plan, how we can actually start enhancing and building these types of skills. So for me, again, if I'm thinking about it from a security perspective, from an information security perspective, these are kind of the really simple 5 mandate items that I need to start thinking about. So the first is, of course, secure cloud services. If I'm utilizing, my organization is moving more and more services to cloud, I need to make sure that they're secure. And it's not just with our infrastructure. So if we're using AWS, Azure, GCP, Alibaba, etc., it's not just around the security of the infrastructure itself, but it's also the security of the SaaS services, the software as a service service providers, and making sure that we can also support and apply, again, good cloud security to platform as a service as well. So again, as a good mandate, a good starting mandate, making sure that we have, again, we are securing those cloud services. The next is then just securing the connection to those cloud and web services. And again, this comes from a kind of a myriad of requirements. In some cases, it could be that, again, we see that most organizations will, of course, want to proxy all of their traffic through to secure a connection to a cloud service through an existing data center. But what we've seen is that a number of organizations have realized that the performance impact for that is too great. So what they've actually said is that we'll allow our employees to directly connect to these cloud services, so they won't have to proxy through our data centers. But of course, that also adds levels of risk. So what we're seeing is organizations are really focusing on ensuring that connection is made securely, and that also security can be applied to that connection as well. And the security comes in kind of in two main forms. It's that level of threat protection. So looking for malware, looking for anything malicious that can be kind of downloaded or in some cases uploaded to a cloud service. If, for instance, you're allowing third parties and your business partners to also access those cloud applications, you may want to ensure that you're not sharing malware with them, or you're not downloading malware from them that may have been, a file may have been infected by a compromised device. So this is where a level of threat protection is required. And of course, we also need to consider the data as well that is being uploaded and downloaded to these services. And that's where an element of data protection is also required. So again, we can start seeing quite a common pattern that we've got now. We're securing our cloud services. We're understanding that we're building a secure connection to those cloud web services without having to proxy all of our traffic back to a data center. And we're also applying levels of threat protection and data protection as well. And then the final point is around how we actually do all this without, again, further impacting performance. So for most organizations, they realize that, again, with applying levels of security, threat protection and data protection, it will, of course, potentially impact the performance again. And employees could be very upset that it's now taking them longer to access or longer to download files or upload files and perform their day-to-day activities by applying this level of protection. But from a secure path forward, what we can actually do is we can actually consider that we can actually do this with security in mind and also increase performance and reduce latency. I use the analogy of if you're using a cloud service, it's a bit like currently like wanting to fly to a country and actually choosing to fly via 15 different airports. So having an indirect flight through to 15 different airports. That's typically how the internet will try to route you to the cloud service itself. But of course, there are ways of actually simplifying also that connection, which increases performance, and you can apply those levels of security as well. Now, the model for this model for this kind of direct path is based on what we consider as being kind of the inverted network. Gartner call this the secure access service edge model. And ultimately what it does is it focuses on the kind of the key elements. And what I'll do is I'll kind of explain this in a bit more detail as we go through. So again, we have over here, we have again our central security requirements built around the kind of a user, a device, an application they're using, identity, making sure they've authenticated correctly, performing a real-time risk assessment, and also understanding variables such as location, the time, and the role that person has. Now, these things are actually very similar to the zero trust model, where we can actually look to authenticate somebody to an application based on multiple variables, not just based on an IP address. So this is actually key to this model. And then we start looking at the types of controls needed for performance, for security, so that employee can securely access these cloud services. I mentioned at the beginning that kind of that maze of network traffic and traffic flow and data flow. And we can actually manage most of these through a consolidation of, again, network and security controls. And this is where we see organizations that are leading the way in terms of this approach, applying these levels of controls, these rings outside of the kind of the key elements and variables. And then what we actually start looking at is, well, where do we actually secure this? Now, we could apply all of the controls onto the device. I know from experience, when you start applying lots and lots of different controls onto endpoint devices, you start having to do that for 2 to 3 devices per employee, and it will slow down the device, and not all devices will be happy to have this level of control. So this is where we actually start seeing organizations looking at this edge security model. And again, looking at this from a secure path forward, building a secure connection directly to from the device to cloud services. And this is where we see the secure path forward. Okay, with controls applied at the edge to, again, infrastructure providers, so our AWSs or GCPs or Azures, to traditional data centers, perhaps provided by Equinix, or again, other colo providers are available, and also to these kind of centralized SaaS and PaaS services that sit within other data centers managed by, again, their cloud service providers themselves. So this is what we see as the kind of model moving forward. But of course, there's ways that we need to start looking at how we actually map these two specific programs. Now, most organizations, again, because it's May, Vic has mentioned as well, May 5 steps. I wanted to focus on 5 steps to actually help organizations accelerate their program and apply security as well. So I focused on these five steps. So the first step is discover, then prioritize, then protect, then educate, and then govern. And when we look at this security model, we can actually map this to most kind of leading cloud security programs where they have also to consider all of these other variables. There may be reporting requirements from governance perspective. There may be a control element around data protection and threat protection. There may be levels of, again, proving identity and access. There may be even areas around cost management and making sure that your organization is not overspending in terms of the cloud services it's consuming. There's also elements around how you manage resiliency, visibility. All of these variables actually need to be covered, but they can all be mapped to this 5-step program. So I'll explain how, again, I've done this in my experience, how I'm working with other CISOs across the globe, some of the leading organizations in the world, some of the largest organizations in the world, and how they're building their program mapped to these 5 steps. So let's start off with the first step. Again, discover. We can actually go into some elements around the deliverables of that first step. So the first kind of real aspect is, again, we need to understand the profile of the organization and which cloud services are being consumed. Now, we can actually probably guess this, but the easiest way is to actually look at a mapping diagram and look at traffic flows, and that will actually help us identify which services are being used. The second step, we can then look at building an inventory. And again, some of the organizations I'm working with right now, that is their primary goal to get in this first stage, is to get a working inventory of all the cloud services that are being consumed, either that are either approved or perhaps even understanding the level of shadow IT they have. And then looking at, again, high-risk services that have high-risk data flow. So of those services that are being consumed, which of those are considered high risk? When we move into the prioritized stage, so the next stage is looking at, again, do we have for instance, a valid business justification for each one of those services that are being consumed in the inventory? Have, for instance, audit, risk, and compliance teams been involved in the selection of that product? Are they aware that there potentially is data being uploaded to those services? Again, has there been any kind of a vendor management or third-party risk assessment being completed? Now, what we see is that the average organization uses well over 1,500 cloud applications. Audit, risk, compliance teams may only be familiar with a few hundred. So there immediately is a gap, and actually working with audit, risk, and compliance teams and GRC functions in general, they are amazed that in many cases that the organization is consuming so many of these cloud services without a review. So this is a great starting point in terms of prioritization of those elements. And then the final point is around identifying, do you have any crown jewel data, so anything that is critical to your organization in any of those data flows, and how can you actually start potentially putting controls, the threat protection and data protection around that data flow itself. So the third step is around looking at applying levels of protection. So we've done our discovery, we're prioritized, we're now applying policies, and here we can start, for instance, blocking access to certain applications if they've not been given the green light, the approval by the business. We may not want to block, we may not want to be so brash and just block all of those applications, but we may want to, for instance, even apply a threat protection to ensure that we're at least scanning anything that's coming down from that cloud application. So if it is compromised, if there is a file that is compromised, that we still apply levels of anti-malware. Now, again, if you're looking at this from a cloud service perspective, traditional security controls may not be able to apply or scan those files being downloaded. It may not be through a protocol that is traditionally supported by a kind of a legacy security control. It's looking at the API and the JSON level of that activity that needs to occur. And then again, we can apply levels of data protection policy as well. And this is where we can just stop that crown jewel data or a very sensitive category of data going up to a high risk application itself. For me, this is actually, when we move into the fourth stage, this actually offers most value to organizations, because we now actually expose and share this information with other business and data owners. So we've applied a level of protection. We're now looking to educate the business. And this is actually a great way of also educating employees. So reminding them of the security policies, reminding them of the use of, for instance, personal apps that may be permitted, but again, we shouldn't really be sending corporate data up into a personal application. And it will also identify existing or new broken business processes that may actually come back and damage the organization. So this education phase is really key in this kind of 5-step plan. And then we finalize with the kind of governance step, where now we can report on the overall cloud security program with our board. We can look at continually assessing those changes and identify any new risks that may come in, that may have to jump to the top 10 on your risk register. And then the ultimate goal really is to automate this cloud risk management approach. So applying these 5 steps with these 15 kind of sub-steps can actually build a very good contextual rich risk management program with cloud at the center. So that's a really high level overview of those 5-step programs. I have a paper, I published a paper on this. So if you're interested, there's a link here in terms of this. It focuses on data protection and focuses on those 5-step plans, and also covers the other business area benefits of utilizing cloud for this perspective. So I already mentioned some of those benefits, but cost savings, the increased agility, going back to that article by India Times that recommended that organizations move to that more agile program. Looking at the GRC benefits of this as well, the compliance element, and of course, ensuring the kind of the fundamental of all of this is that we securely adopt cloud in the right way. So with that, I'll open up for questions. If anybody has a question, then feel free to put it into the chat, and hopefully I can respond.
Neil, question. A lot of time companies struggle as we are exploding like exponentially on the cloud to get even the inventory, right? What is your thoughts on getting the exact inventory on the clouds?
Yes, that's a great question. I think, again, when we look at most organizations that have an existing inventory, a system inventory, or an application inventory, it only includes maybe 5% of total services and applications that are consuming, because it doesn't always include cloud. The only real way to do this, again, I use our own Netskope technology for this whole method, is that what happens is that when anybody uses a new application, the application is logged. It will be assessed based on an existing cloud confidence index that we actually have applied. We have over 35,000 applications within that inventory that I can just baseline against. And then what I can do is I can then store that in an inventory. I link that to a GRC tool that I use internally as part of the program. And what happens is that I do that on a monthly basis. But also, if I see a new application being used that's high risk, I can get an immediate alert to say this application may require an assessment. So actually what I'm now doing is I'm building a kind of a tiered approach to this. I have a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 inventory. The tier 1 inventory would include all of my applications, the cloud applications that are being used on a daily basis. Tier 2 may be applications used on a weekly or monthly basis. And tier 3 may be kind of ad hoc. So that's how I build that program. But the majority of the time it's having that visibility and using our own Netskope technology to actually give me that visibility.
Thanks, Neil.
I see another quick question. I can take that one really quickly around data classification. So great question. So data classification is of course important for certain types of data. So things like intellectual property that don't have it's not easy to understand which level of classification is needed to be applied. So that's where classification is really key for the protection of information of intellectual property. But what we're also seeing is organizations are looking more closely at things such as DLP, so data loss prevention, that can actually analyze and assign a category of data to that. So for instance, the example would be if I've got somebody in my marketing team that is sharing 1,000 records, 1,000 personal data records through a high-risk application. I don't need to classify that information. I just know that that is probably a bad decision being made, uploading something through a high-risk application. Really what we should be doing at that point in time is that we should be educating the employee to say, actually, this is the application we use for sharing this type of data. So we actually can see this as being a great way of integrating, again, levels of classification for things such as intellectual property, as well as data loss prevention that can help with identifying categories of data and applying that to a kind of more contextual rich decision being made based on kind of the source and destination of that traffic and data flow. So that's how it actually works. And again, I think the question mentioned the CASB, so cloud access security brokers, tying that all back into a CASB and a policy that you create. In so many cases, you could automate as well, would be, again, a really powerful way of applying that level of protection to that traffic and data flow. I know my time is up, but there's some great questions coming in. So what I will do is I'll try to answer those questions while the rest of the presentation continues.
Yeah, I think.
So with that, I'll hand back to you, Vikas.
Yeah, perfect. So now over to you, Aparna. So guys who joined late, the first session that Neil presented was about 5 steps to secure way forward. And the next segment, Aparna Mathur is going to talk about building a growth mindset about, again, in 5 steps. So Aparna, over to you. Maybe you can introduce yourself and then we can get going.
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much, Vikas. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you, speaking about a topic that I love a lot. Okay, so let me start with an introduction. I'm a leadership coach and facilitator. I'm a trained counselor for emotional well-being. I'm the co-founder of Growing Leadership of Women, an initiative that supports organizations on their diversity and inclusion journey. Have been working for the last 25 years now, a combination of business and consulting experience. I worked with the Times of India, Schindler, Canon, iDiscovery, among some other organizations. What I'm really passionate about is the spirit of self-discovery. How is it that in one lifetime we can truly tap into our deep, dark potential, right? The part that we are not even aware of, our blind spots. How can we uncover them to live a life of purpose and meaning? So I do a lot of coaching, facilitation work. I interact with the entrepreneurs, with executives and organizations. When I'm not facilitating programs, I pursue my passion in classical dance. I'm a trained Bharatanatyam dancer and have been training for the last 2 decades. I also run an NGO, Deep Foundation. It's a life skills program for children from lesser served backgrounds. So that's a little bit about me. Today we are going to be decoding the concept of mindsets and also understand how is it that I can bring a growth mindset closer to my life. What is it that I can do that will help me lead a life of purpose, of meaning, and of fulfillment? Okay, so I'm going to start with an activity. I know all of you have been seated for a while, and it's a good idea to stretch and move a little bit. So if possible, if your bandwidth allows, do switch on your video. And it's a very short activity for about 3 minutes. The objective really is to, stretch your right arm up and try and touch or reach out. Even if you can't touch, reach out to the highest point. Right? It could be a bookshelf or a picture, anything, right? So reach higher. And when you do that, make a mental note of how high your hand went up, right? I'm sure you've been able to make a mark somewhere there. Okay, so you can bring it back down. And I want you to close your eyes and visualize that when you do this the second time round, you will go much higher than the first time round. Think of all the things that are around you which can help you go much, much higher. So maybe this time you will touch the top of the bookshelf or a door jamb or maybe even the ceiling fan or anything, but you're going way, way higher than the first time round, right? Okay, you can open your eyes and one more time stretch, go really high up. Do what you have to reach higher. Okay, great. So we can settle down now, and I'd like to hear from you on the chat box as to, did you go higher the second time round? So Vikas, can I ask you to read out the chat section, or maybe I'm just tuning into that as myself?
It is filled with yes.
Yes, okay. So did you do anything differently the second time round that helped you to go higher? Okay, Vikas, I'm not, for some reason, not able to see the chat section. So I'm going to request Vikas, you or Rishi to read them out, please.
So people are saying better concentration, push
Yes.
themselves, stretch a bit,
Yeah.
push more.
Excellent. Great. So I think it would be a fair assumption to say that almost everybody reached a higher point the second time round, right?
Yep.
Okay. So to get any kind of results, it's very obvious that we need to do something. So actions precede results, right? So say, for example, if we want to be healthy and fit, we need to have an exercise regime, a diet, which helps us to get fit, right? If we want to achieve a stretch sales target, we need to have a healthy sales pipeline, which means we need to make more calls. So actions will always give us a certain kind of results, right? What many people don't think about often are the mindsets, right? Mindset is what we think, what we feel, what we believe. And this really helps us to achieve breakthrough results or better results. As you saw in this activity, your level of concentration, somewhere your belief that the second time round, I will go higher, right? Some of you may have taken different actions also, which helped you to go higher. So mindsets then become very, very critical. Imagine a student who is weak in maths and is constantly telling herself, no, I can't do it. I won't be able to get good marks. Chances are that her actions will be very half-baked, very half-hearted. The results will be a poor score, right? So what we think and what we believe become very critical in the kind of results that we seek. And the mindsets are a part of us which we don't normally see. Another person can't see it. Actions are observable, results are measurable, but there's no way to assess a mindset except if we are aware of what we are thinking, what we are feeling, and what we truly believe. You know, McKinsey did a study some years ago, and they said most change management studies or surveys that are done for change initiatives, most of them fail because they haven't factored the mindset. They're just working on actions and results. Okay. So mindset, a key element in achieving breakthrough results. So I'm going to share with you the work of a very eminent psychologist called Carol Dweck. She drew out the distinction between what she called a fixed mindset and a growth mindset, and she came up with 5 differentiators. She says a fixed mindset is a person who believes that the brain can't grow, and yet they have to look very smart. So what do? They avoid challenges. They stay where they are. They don't step out, right? Everything outside is very risky. They give up easily. You know, such kind of people are very unlikely to do a root cause analysis. They will come to a decision very quickly and they say, oh, this is not possible at all. They also see effort as totally fruitless. So they will go up to a point and then give up very easily. You know, kya faida? It's a very resigned acceptance of suboptimal circumstances. They also ignore critical feedback. Now, feedback that can really help them is completely ignored. So you will hear comments like, oh, you know, that person said this. There's a lot of blaming. There's a lot of judging. There's a lot of, you know, talking about the other. But there's less focus on what can I do differently. And such people also get very threatened by the success of others. Right? So say, for example, somebody is doing very well. Chances are the comments will be, you know, that person had to do well. His father knows people in the ministry. He's very well connected. So it's very easy for him. So there's a lot of rationalization in terms of what can be achieved. There's a lot of thought around, it's easy for them, but it's not possible for me. Yeah. So people with a fixed mindset plateau very easily and they achieve less than their full potential. On the contrary, if we were to look at people with a growth mindset embrace challenges. Right? They persist in the face of setbacks. Passion, perseverance, grit are qualities of a person with a growth mindset. They also learn from criticism. So if they get feedback that, hey, you know, your presentation wasn't that great, they'd want to find out more. When you said that, not great, what did you mean? Was it my conviction? Was it the content? Was it my body language? Tell me more, because I want to improve. And they find lessons and inspiration in the success of others. Right? So they get very inspired. They want to take a leaf out of their journeys and think about what else can they do to improve. So as a result of this, they are more likely to tap into their full potential and reach greater heights of achievement. The left side, if you see, is very static. It's about status quo, comfort zone, not much movement happening here. Whereas the right side, which is the growth mindset, is a lot more dynamic. There is constant movement, there's continuous improvement, self-growth, creativity, innovation. There's a lot of flexibility in this space. So the two are extremely distinct. You know, some of the most sterling examples from our Bollywood movies are the roles that are played by Amir Khan in Lagan, Shah Rukh Khan in Chak De, Kangana Ranaut in Queen. And if you know these, if you've seen these movies, you know that all these characters faced a lot of resistance, a lot of pushback from people with a fixed mindset, right? And yet they managed to kind of go past that to achieve their goals. So it calls for a lot of, I would say, courage to be in the growth mindset space, because you may have the world on one side, but you need to stand here and say, no, I will go on. I will keep at it, right? Okay, so I'm going to take you through certain statements of, you know, the fixed and the growth mindset continuum. And I want you to identify, as I speak certain statements, I want you to identify people in your network. You may even see yourself in some of the statements that are coming up. So let's look at how people with a fixed and a growth mindset respond to new tasks. Now, these new tasks could be a very stretched sales target, or data migration from one platform to another, or drafting new data protection policies in the wake of the COVID situation. A person on the left-hand side is more likely to say, very risky. I don't think I'll be able to do it, right? So they're going to hold themselves back. They're not likely to stick their necks out or raise their hands for something which hasn't been done before or which has a high element of risk. They like to be in their comfort zone. On the other side, a person with a growth mindset will say, hey, I haven't done this before, but let me see what I can do. Maybe I can learn. And yes, there is an element of risk, but how can I manage the risk better? So it's not like they are more reckless, but they take a very measured sense of the risk involved and cautiously kind of move into that space with a view of learning and growing. Let's look at setbacks. So say, for example, an entrepreneur who has started a business and has not met with that much success will look at himself and say, things failed. I knew this would happen. What are others going to say? There's a very strong sense of failure, of fear of failure. On the other hand side, a person with a growth mindset will say, okay, so something went wrong, but what can I do differently? What's the big learning here? Why? Because there's a hope for success the second time round. I want to highlight another distinction here between the fixed and the growth mindset. On the left-hand side, the person is likely to, fuse self with the task. So if the outcome is not achieved, it's about personal failure. There's a lot of personalization. I was wrong. I made a mistake. I failed. Whereas on the right-hand side, they're able to separate the person from the task, the self from the tasks. So it's about, I'm okay, but let me see what I can do about changing the situation. So there's there is depersonalization from the self and the task that happens, and that helps them to improve and grow. Relationships. Let's look at a parent and a child. A very controlling parent is likely to have a top-down approach with his child. This is what I think is right. This is how it should be done. There's a high degree of a directive approach. So the result is the child is likely to throw a tantrum, will resent this approach. On the other hand side, you have a collaborative parent who says, hey, listen, this is not working. You waking up late every morning, missing breakfast, and you're not in time for your online class. What do you think can be done about this? Right? Can we do something about this? So there's a space for collaboration. There is a space for dialogue with the other. Emotions. On the left-hand side, feelings of anxiety, feeling lethargic, panicky, irritation, anger, very heavy energies. Whereas on the right-hand side, there's curiosity, there's excitement, there's joy, happiness, very light and buoyant energies. So what I have shared with you is like a continuum, right? So these are the two ends of the spectrum. And in no way am I alluding that you are either here or there. It's not a binary situation. Because it's a continuum, we are somewhere in between or maybe more towards one side on this continuum. And that's something that I would urge you to assess for yourself. Where are you on this continuum? Are you more on the right-hand side or are you more on the left-hand side? And it's even possible that for different things, you have a different mindset or a different orientation in which you approach that situation. So if, for example, you could be a very collaborative parent, but when it comes to new tasks, you may be very hesitant. You'd like to stay in your comfort zone and not venture into a space that has certain risks attached, right? So I want you to turn the spotlight on yourselves and see where are you. In fact, think of a situation where you feel you demonstrate a fixed mindset, a mindset of stuckness, a mindset of not being flexible, a mindset of feeling like you're hitting a dead end. And a good indication of figuring out that you might have a fixed mindset is to look into your emotions. So if you're feeling anxious, agitated, frustrated, irritated, chances are that you're dealing with a fixed mindset. Okay. So now that we've understood there is a distinction between the fixed and the growth mindset, let's look at what are some of the ways in which we can move from a fixed to a growth mindset. How do we make that transition? I want you to do an activity now, maybe pull out a paper and pencil or make a mental note and think of a situation where you may be demonstrating a fixed mindset. And the situation has to be yours, not about somebody else doing something, but it's about, yes, I am feeling this in this moment. It could be related to your work. It could be something in your personal life, a new task, a relationship, anything, right? Anything related to the COVID situation. And in this situation, think of what are the actions that you're taking and what results is it giving you. So the situation, the actions, and the result. And after that, think of what could be a new mindset. Remember, we spoke about it initially that if we have to change the situation, we have to change our mindset. We have to approach that situation very differently so that we show up differently in terms of the actions that we take so that we get a different set of results. So with this new mindset, what are some of the new actions and behavior that you can take? And I'm going to take my own example. Much as I would like to be on the growth mindset side, I know there are a few things that I get stuck by. And this has a lot to do with our conditioning, our deeply held fears, our experiences that make us fixed. So as a consultant and for the work that I do at Growing Leadership of Women, social media is extremely important for me to showcase my work. But every time I have to put out a post on LinkedIn or Facebook, a part of me cringes. It's, I get this whole feeling, the thoughts in my mind are, do I really need to talk about myself? Do I really need to put this out? Everybody knows this. What will people think? They'll think I'm bragging about myself. Okay? So while my mind knows that social media is good to showcase my work, these thoughts keep pulling me back. So I'm constantly in this tussle. The head is saying something, the heart is saying something else, and I'm constantly getting lost in this tussle. The actions are, obviously, I don't speak so much about my work, and the results are not many people know about Glow. So with this kind of tussle in my mind, I was having a conversation with my mentor, and he actually coached me on this. And the two big insights for me that emerged as a result of that coaching session were, the first, I was seeing my work and myself getting fused together. Right? So it was talking about my work was equal to talking about myself. The moment I was able to de-link the two, I felt easy. I said, okay, it's not about me, it's about my work. And there is a need for this kind of work. It's getting good reviews, good feedback. So this work needs to reach more people. The second big insight that I had was my work is way bigger than who I am. The scope of my work is much bigger than who I am. And with these two key insights, even though I would say I'm still work in progress, but something internally has shifted. Now I hesitate a lot lesser when I'm putting out a post. I speak about, even in social circles, I speak about my work a lot more. I'm not hesitant. Right? So I'm going to pause for some time for you to think of your situation. And where you may be demonstrating a fixed mindset. And if anybody'd like to share, please feel free to unmute yourself and speak about your situation.
So Aparna, we have a Elite CISO fitness group as well. And here we see a lot of fixed mindset that we cannot do a full marathon or half marathon.
Okay.
For example, myself, I never run half marathon earlier, before starting the Elite CISO fitness group. So then with the group's energy that everybody is running and there's a motivation, now I've run like 7 half marathons. So that's one example of breaking the fixed mindset. And
yeah.
There are many in our groups like Saurabh Gugnani, Alok, Sundar Bhai. There are a lot of people who have done full marathons now.
Wonderful. Great. Yeah. So what you're saying is peer pressure, peer support has helped you to break a certain mindset, right? Excellent. Great, Vikas. Thank you so much. But I would urge, I mean, we may not have that much time. We are closer to 12. But I would like all of you to think of where are you getting stuck? And if you do a deep level of introspection, you will find that there are certain instances in your life where you're not getting the kind of results that you may be seeking. Yeah. And use this template of finding out what are the actions, what are the results, and what could be a new mindset that you could hold. Because in the context of the new mindset, you will take radically different actions, which will give you completely different results. Something internally has to, and I'll give you a certain example of mindsets which are very common, right? I'm not good enough. I cannot take on this stretch target. Some of the very cliched ones that we hear very often are, boys don't cry. There are gender stereotypes. If I enter the kitchen, I will make a mistake, right? Now, these are some of the mindsets that we hold. Or say, for example, heavy engineering industries is not a space for most women. Or life is unfair. It's constantly, challenging and stressing me out. These are very fixed mindsets or beliefs or assumptions that are so deep-rooted that it prevents us from taking very constructive actions that can actually help us grow and learn. Right? So I'd encourage you to think about this and use these set of questions to shift that within you. Okay, so let's look at some of the practices that help to build a growth mindset. And I want you to look at 5 practices that definitely help in breaking a fixed mindset to one of a growth mindset. Positive affirmation, right? So Vikas, you spoke about the marathon. Somewhere deep down, the belief was, yes, I will be able to do it. You got encouraged by other peers around, but there was also a deep level of affirmation in your ability to do a half marathon and then going on to a full marathon. I know a friend of mine who actually puts it out that I will be able to generate X amount of business for my work, right? Puts this out as a message on her study desk so that, it's a message that goes to the subconscious constantly, and then actions emerge from that. Stepping out of your comfort zone, challenging yourself, doing something very different, breaking a habit, right? So picking up a new skill, a hobby, a sport where you feel constantly challenged. Seeking feedback. So if you've made a presentation, good idea to show it to somebody and say, hey, can you critique it? What else can I do to improve? The 4th one, celebrating failures, very important, right? So if I've decided to enter the kitchen and make a meal for my family, but I realize I've burnt the food or I've added too much salt and it's a full-on mess, it's okay to laugh about it and say that, yeah, I'll get it right the second time around, rather than kind of blaming and saying, I will never enter the kitchen again. Join a group where people challenge you to do better. These are peer learning communities, quite like the the Elite CISO group here, where you get challenged to think better. You learn from others. You try and imbibe some of their qualities to improve. So 5 practices to build a growth mindset. Okay, so I'm going to pause right now and see if there are any questions that are coming up for you. I'd be happy to take those questions now, and then I'd like to close with a video. Okay, so let me play the video. If you're wearing headphones, I'd suggest you remove them so that the audio is not too loud. This is a very inspiring story of Arunima Sinha, India's first amputee who climbed the Mount Everest. So take a look. Okay.
Aparna, there are a couple of questions, and one very interesting is how to deal with a negative boss. Now, this is coming during lockdown, so everybody's at home. I'm not sure which boss we are talking about, so yeah. Let's see.
I think that's a common complaint, Vikas. I mean, I've had terrible bosses too, and that can, consume you completely and come in the way of you performing well. So, very pertinent question. I think that, the way to look at it is to see where is it that there's a kind of a, attention, right? And what are my own expectations? Where am I? Because there is no way that you can change your boss. The boss will be the way he or she is, right? What you can change is you. And when I say you, it's your own mindset. It's about what you think and feel about the situation. So what about this situation can you let go of some expectation, which will help you free up, the preoccupation with the boss being tough or demanding, not being flexible. Something within you has to shift, because if you shift that and you have and break an expectation of the boss, you may actually want to let go of certain comments or statements, or you may understand your boss and say, okay, fine, if he's a very micromanaging boss, you may know and preempt some of his thoughts by taking certain actions. You'll be able to figure out a way of managing your boss, right? Rather than get totally weighed down by it.
Right. And similar question around the same lines is how not to be negative during this COVID-19 situation, how to avoid those negative thoughts. That's another question.
Yes, a good question. And I think many of us are victims of that. It would also mean a webinar of another, on another theme altogether, where we talk about some of the negative thoughts that are plaguing us during these times. But a few things that really work well, and I'll share what works well for me, is setting perspective, right? So these days I'm speaking a lot to migrant laborers, and when I look at their situation, there is a sense of privilege that I hold. And the moment that context and that perspective gets set, everything else is fine. I'm no longer, in that whirlpool of negative thoughts, because there's a huge sense of privilege. The second, I would say, as a practice, is that of a gratitude practice. Really works very well with, reducing the impact of negative thoughts, panic, fear, anxiety. What am I grateful for today? And actually saying that every morning, if I have, simple things like having at least food on my table, or, a family around me, or the comfort of an AC home, it could be anything. But the spirit of gratitude helps to deal with the flurry of anxious thoughts that keep swimming in our minds. So perspective and gratitude, these two tips and techniques really work for me. I hope it does for you as well.
Great, sounds good. So I think we are at 12:05. So 5, we are consistent with the 5 as a theme. Right. I think there is no other question. Maybe we can take one more question if somebody wants to type. We still have like 30 seconds.
Okay. I would also like you to share in the chat box as to what was your one big takeaway from this session. What's the one thought that shared with you?
And this is for everyone, not for me, right?
This is for everyone, Vikas, yes.
Yeah.
So for some reason, I'm not able to see the chat box. So I'm sorry, I have to keep requesting you to play that back to me.
Yeah, sure. Yes, being positive, great thoughts, nothing is impossible. The one big takeaway is like nothing is impossible. Then focus on your mindset, change your mindset. And Neil says, thanks for everyone. Thanks for attending. Deep dive into yourself and assess yourself, bring gratitude. So there are many things. I think people are appreciating your insights, Aparna. So thanks for the great session.
Thank you so much. And I wish you all the best. I know these are tough times, but stay safe, stay healthy.
Perfect.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Aparna. See you next week with another topic on security and something around leadership. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.